All right. Hi, Rico. Welcome.
Hi,
Let
Rochelle. How's it going? How you doing
Good.
in these crazy times we're living in?
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah,
All
pretty
right. So
much my attitude has been one day at a time.
right.
So here we are at 12 noon, halfway through a Wednesday. So I think I've got it made.
That's great. Yeah, I think I've been doing kind of the same thing, one day at a time. All right. So before we begin, let me just take a moment to welcome our viewers. So, hi, YouTubers! Thanks for joining us again. If you haven't seen our previous video, please be sure to check it out. There should be a link in the description below. Today I have Rico with me to talk about the sacred elements of Gothic architecture. Rico is another member and a past president of our docent team at St. Dominic's Church in San Francisco. Currently, we are doing these videos as it is not possible to give physical tours of the church during COVID. However, once we're able to, please be sure to join us in person. So, welcome, Rico, and thanks so much for taking time to talk to us today.
It's a pleasure, Rochelle. So, as you may or may not know, Rochelle, I've been a parishioner of St. Dominic since 2011 and a member of the docent group since 2015.
Oh,
So on
wow.
that faithful July morning in 2011, my partner Adele and I decided to do a field trip and go to a church that we'd heard a lot about, had great reviews on Yelp, and that was St. Dominic's Catholic Church in the Lower Fillmore.
Mhm.
And so we drove down. I entered the front door, took about 4 or 5 steps into the church, and was literally stunned by the beauty of St. Dominic's. It was, I guess you can best describe as love at first sight. Adele actually had to take me by the elbow and help me to the pew. I just felt that the church was so remarkable. And what I've wanted to do as a docent since that time is to help others experience that feeling, that transcendent feeling that I had the first time that I saw St. Dominic's. So I hope I've been able to do that over the past 5 years. Um, I certainly wish we could do live tours so that I could help to convey that experience. But I guess the video tours are the next best way to go. It's the plan B, so to speak.
Yeah, actually, I think you totally inspired me when I entered St. Dominic's a couple of times after your tour on this particular piece that we're doing today. I was like, I started to take a new look at the church when I walked in, and like, it was amazing, very awe-inspiring.
You know, so many of us have busy lives and we're just not aware of our surroundings sometimes. And you can come to church and you become familiar with it and you lose awareness of the absolute extraordinary beauty that's surrounding you. So sometimes we need to take that step back, take a few deep breaths, maybe even take a seat and look around our beautiful church and just take in and be inspired by what's there.
Yeah, well said.
Anyway, this video is a very brief introduction into the Gothic style or the Neo-Gothic or Gothic revival. That's what St. Dominic's is, Rochelle. It is part of the Neo-Gothic movement. So this architectural movement began in England in the 18th century. It drew its inspiration from medieval architecture like the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe. Therefore, it can be said that St. Dominic's is based on the great cathedrals of Europe. At least the idea is there,
Mhm.
okay? So St. Dominic's was designed by English-born architect Arnold Sutherland Constable. Constable practiced for a firm called Beazer Brothers Architecture in Seattle, Washington. The firm was headed by twins Louis and Michael J. Beazer, And the Beezers were absolutely enamored with the neo-Gothic style, and they specialized in building churches. As a side note, there are three notable artists present in the construction of St. Dominic's Church. Two are glassmakers and one is a wood carver. The glassmakers are Charles Arconic of Boston and Max Ingrand of Paris. The carver is Edmund Schmidt of Oberammergau, Germany. So
do we happen to know if who the who the people we hired to create even the Ray dose that's behind me right here?
So that I believe is Edmund Schmidt of Germany. I'm not 100% sure on that, so you may have me on that one.
Okay, I will have to take a look and see if I can find any information on that then.
Okay, it's probably in our vast binder of research material.
All right, thanks.
So work began on St. Dominic's in 1923 to replace the old Romanesque church building that stood in that spot before. In fact, our current version of St. Dominic's is actually the fourth church on the site. It was dedicated in 1928. So Gothic architecture or Gothic revival and design is a complex subject, but sometimes when you understand the fundamentals of something complex, you can begin to get kind of a grasp of it. And there are some basic fundamentals that we can understand to help us understand the overall nature of St. Dominic's and its neo-Gothic design. So the three basic elements of Gothic structures are height, light, and the pointed arch. These three elements are on display at St. Dominic's and can be readily seen. The three elements interrelate with one another to form a theme. And as one commentator observed, the cathedral draws on strong architectural traditions and symbolisms, which are intended, whether 1,000 or 100 years ago, to affect a visitor's experience. So remember what I talked about, Rochelle, when I said the first day that I walked into St. Dominic's, I was struck with a kind of a feeling.
Yeah.
This is intentional. These elements are designed to have this kind of transcendent effect upon an observer. And I think for many people, it's successful at St. Dominic's. So height, one of the elements, has a tendency to draw the observer's eye upward towards heaven, as it were, and it gives the sense that there's something larger than oneself. It creates a kind of transcendent space, and within this space is the component of light. The quality of light is created by the stained glass windows, and it's dynamic. And what I mean by it being dynamic is that the quality of the experience, Rochelle, is different at 9 a.m. in the morning from 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And it's different in the spring as it is in the winter. So dependent upon what the sun is doing and what the weather is doing on a particular day, is it sunny, is it cloudy, is it overcast, affects the quality of light that enters the stained glass windows into the interior of the church. Pope Benedict had this to say about stained glass. The stained glass window, which flood the interior with mystic light, from the outside are dark, heavy, even dreary. But once one enters the church, they suddenly come alive, reflecting the light passing through them. They reveal all their splendor, and it is only from the inside, from the experience of faith and ecclesial life, that we see the church as she truly is. That is, flooded with grace, resplendent in beauty, adorned by the manifold gifts of the Spirit. And, I'm not sure if it can be said any better than that. In the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, the stained glass windows actually have a second function. Interestingly, they're part of the design component that holds the walls up.
Oh.
I'm not an architectural engineer or structural engineer. I'm not sure how that happens, but they are an integral component in holding up the church. Now, that's probably not true at St. Dominics. St. Dominics construction is very, very different from medieval construction. The medieval cathedrals are constructed in stone. St. Dominics is poured concrete. Okay. So the pointed arch, which is also can be seen all through St. Dominics, has two functions. One, it acts as a support for the structure, and it's a true support at St. Dominics. And second, it represents the medieval symbol of perfection.
Here we have a brief summary of what we just discussed.
So one controversial idea is that the designers may have based this on the golden ratio. That may or may not be true, but one can see by observing these pointed arches aspects of the golden ratio. So finally, what I'd like to talk about is this idea of sacred geometry and how that applies to Gothic architecture. So Rochelle, in our modern society, we basically have a scientific and materialistic worldview. We don't give much credence to the idea of sacred geometry. We're very skeptical, or even to the sacred nature of mathematics. But what we have to understand is, the thing that needs to be understood is the architects of the medieval cathedrals who designed these structures in Europe, they were inspired by St. Augustine, and they did believe in the transcendent nature of numbers. In fact, they were true believers, and they included these aspects in the design of medieval churches. As a result, when you look at these or observe the Gothic cathedrals, you can discover recurring ratios within them, such as 2:1, 8:5, 3:2. In other words, if you take a measuring device from the back of the nave to the altar and compare that against the height of the structure, you could get a sacred ratio, right?
Cool.
I'm not saying that if you and I took a laser measuring device into St. Dominics, we would find these ratios exactly. Remember what I said before, St. Dominics is based on the idea of the medieval cathedral, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Based on that idea. So to some extent, that idea is there. One BBC commentator declared, because of this, the Gothic church is like frozen music. And I think that's the absolute best context to take with you when you enter St. Dominics and look at this structure that's surrounding you. I can certainly feel that for myself.
Right.
So that's the basics, Rochelle.
Cool.
Did you have any questions?
Yeah, actually I did. So you mentioned that this is not Gothic, it's Neo-Gothic.
Right.
So what's the real difference between Gothic and Neo-Gothic?
So it kind of has some modern elements involved in it, some for practical purposes. The great Gothic cathedrals used the pointed arch as a means of holding up the structure, but there are problems with the arch. There are two weak points. So I don't know if you can see how I'm demonstrating with my hands.
Yeah.
This is a pointed arch. These two areas here have weaknesses. And over the centuries, these churches began to become compromised structurally from there. So one thing that Neo-Gothic tries to do is solve those problems. Interestingly, after the earthquake of 1989, there were some structural damage incurred by St. Dominics. St. Dominics, through retrofitting, resolved and solved those problems the same way they solved them with the medieval cathedrals of Europe, and that is to buttress them with what's known as a flying buttress. And you can see those flying buttresses outside the church, you know, going up and reinforcing the archways.
Right. Yeah. Shelley did talk about that last
Right.
in our last video. So yeah, no, that is actually really cool.
So one thing, and this is interesting, St. Dominics is the English version of Neo-Gothic. And one of the telltale ways that you can see that is when you look at the window entering the church, the beautiful Christ in glory window, that its square footage is about 400 square feet, larger than the square footage of the typical studio apartment in San Francisco. The English Neo-Gothic is usually has that Christ in glory window, where the French Neo-Gothic has a rose window.
Also, the floor plan for Gothic cathedrals is also unique, isn't it? It's like
It is. So it's a cruciform. So if you were a bird perched upon the ceiling of St. Dominic's looking down, you would see a cross with a circle around it. Okay, so the body of the cross is known as the nave. So when you walk in the front door and look towards the altar, that space is the nave. It represents the body of the cross. As you walk towards the front of the altar, when you get to the place where you can look to the left and right and see those two beautiful stained glass windows, that is the transept. It represents the body, the arms of the cross.
Gotcha.
Now, around St. Dominic's is this circle known as the ambulatory. The root of ambulatory literally means to walk. So you can, for instance, walk around St. Dominic's. It's about a city block, and use that as a form of contemplation, to contemplate a gospel.
Oh, cool. So in a way, like you receive the Eucharist at the heart of the cross, right?
That's right.
Oh, that's so cool. All right. Well, I think that's all my questions. But I'm sure hopefully our YouTube listeners might have some, and so hopefully we can address them in a future video. And so thank you, Rico, so much for talking to us. As I mentioned, like having taken this tour initially was actually what inspired me to join the Docents initially. So I definitely enjoy this tour several times. And then also, yes, we are recruiting for docents if anyone's interested. And then I do want to thank you, watchers. You guys make this possible, and thank you so much for joining us today. I did forget to add in the last video, but feel free to post questions and comments for the video. And I want to make this as engaging and informative for all of you. So I hope you all have a blessed day, and thank you again, Rico.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.